So will they give me a signal to begin? Yeah. And here's the clicker.
Anything with the microphones, we'll fade them up and down. You don't need to press any buttons on them. So we'll put the PowerPoint up from the beginning then, and then you can click through as you please.
Okay. So they'll tell me when to go, I guess. Okay. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ashley Ward. I am the director of the Heat Policy Innovation Hub at the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability at Duke University. And thank you all for joining us today to talk about building heat resiliency, how we can make our communities and cities safer. After a record-setting year, vulnerable populations are feeling the impact of heat like never before. And leaders are asking, what can we do to protect the people that we serve? And so today's session is about answering that question. I think we can all agree on the magnitude and the impact of heat. But what our panelists today will focus on are solutions and opportunities, which is what's really exciting about this panel today. At the Nicholas Institute, at the Heat Policy Innovation Hub, we're focused on bridging the lessons from science and the insights from communities into innovative policy solutions. And we focus on public and private partnerships, planning and preparedness, women's health, and rural heat vulnerability. So I'm really excited to hear from all of our panelists today about all of these topics and how we can connect them together. So thank you for joining us. And to begin the conversation, we're going to start with my friend and colleague, Joy Shumate-Guimont. Joy is the lead of the WHO Joint Office for Climate and Health and the Global Heat Health Information Network. And so Joy is going to talk a little bit with us today, just setting the table, right? We're going to set the foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. So the World Meteorological Organization, where I work, has just released the 2023 State of the Climate, telling us that this year is the hottest on record. Unfortunately, we said the same thing last year, and the last 9 years have been the hottest on record as these temperatures continue to rise. And what we're seeing is not only an increase in the number of heat wave days, but we're seeing heat become much more complex. This extreme heat is lasting longer, it's starting earlier, heat waves are hotter, and they're happening at a much greater geographic space. Heat waves are localized phenomena, but we're now seeing that they're occurring over large geographic and transboundary areas, which place a lot of stress on water systems, energy systems, food systems that are transboundary and really necessary to support communities and cities under extreme heat. And unfortunately, looking forward to the future, all emission pathways lead to a hotter future. We are locked in to a certain amount of warming due to the greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere. So it is really delusional to think that we're going back to the summers our grandparents had. The future is a much warmer one. And this is placing billions. The entire world is experiencing extreme heat conditions, and we need to take urgent action, not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate further climate change, but start adapting to these realities of much warmer conditions. So the Global Heat Health Information Network came together about 8 years ago through a concerned network of policymakers and experts who said, we need to learn from each other. We need to start informing policymakers about what's working, about the severity of these risks. And so the network today is a partnership of UN agencies, of NGOs, of public health agencies, of meteorological services and universities around the world who are all concerned about this issue and taking action. And Jen is really focused on learning about what's working. We know that we can't wait for the peer-reviewed literature. We need to be talking to each other. We need to be learning from each other, sharing what is working. And so at its core, the network is really focused on synthesizing the scientific literature, translating that, learning from our partners around the world of what is working and what is needed to be scaled up worldwide to address these risks. We have certain areas of focus where we know particular attention is necessary, including urban heat, which led us to the partnership today with UN Habitat and others to host this event. But also in the occupational setting, we know that workers are on the front line of heat stress. We're starting to learn through research the impacts on maternal and child health. We know that indoor heat conditions can be far hotter and more dangerous than outside conditions. And we know that extreme heat is also leading to complex emergencies linked to water scarcity, drought, wildfires, and other emergencies that need to be managed together. And so over the last years, through our partners, through our dialogues, we've started to really understand there are some key elements that are important to all interventions to address extreme heat. And this starts with the fact that you need the right partnerships. Heat is an all-of-society issue. It just doesn't affect food or health or water or buildings. It's an all-of-society issue that needs to bring partners together. So you need to have the right people considering this issue. And secondly, those people need to have the right information. They need to understand who is vulnerable, where is it hottest, when is it going to be really dangerous, and where we need to focus and target interventions. So the information, which is in the name of the Global Heat Health Information Network, is all about having informed decision-making and being empowered by what we know works. And then the third element of this is taking that knowledge into action and implementing interventions like we're going to hear about from our panel today, but then communicating this as well. What is working? What is needed by communities, especially the most vulnerable? And so we've also started to understand that heat action plans are an instrument that really allows to bring all of these elements together, where at a federal level, at a local level, or even down to a school or a hospital or a household, you can start to think about how are we going to prepare for these conditions? What do we need to do at the city level or at the household level to manage the heat stress that you may be experiencing? And so we'll hear much more about heat action plans, but they can be tailored to what is locally needed, bringing in the multi-sectoral. It's a place to bring everybody around the table to figure out what's the way forward to manage acute emergencies when they happen, but then also build more resilient infrastructure and cities for the longer term. So we're very happy to be collaborating with the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. And here this week, there are new targets that have been set and are being elaborated, which include that multi-sectoral heat action plans need to be in place for at least half of the populations in the world that are vulnerable to heat. And there are a number of other targets within the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda which are specifically moving us forward to a more heat-resilient future. So I invite everybody to get involved with the network. There are many opportunities. It starts with subscribing to a newsletter here where activities, the most recent research, what's happening, profiling projects, is put out every month and is a starting point to see where you can get engaged in your region with different institutions and partners of the network to address extreme heat and bring your learning into the network. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to learning more from our panel. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Joy. Actually, everybody thinks about how much incoming email we have, but that newsletter is one of my favorite things that I get every month. So if you get a chance to scan that and get it, you should. You'll learn so much from that newsletter. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Naomi Hugovest. Did I do that correctly, Naomi? Probably not. You should say your last name. I'm so sorry. Senior Urban Planner, Program Officer for UN Habitat. And Naomi's going to talk to us today about urban populations and the UN Habitat approach for sustainable urban development. And so please welcome Naomi. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for this collaboration in organizing this event. I hope the slides can be up soon. Yeah, thank you. And where should I point? Maybe that side. Great. Thank you. Now, this is the best introduction. We all need to work together as there are some imperfections today. Now, today I would like to talk with you about the building heat resiliency, actions and opportunities for healthier cities and communities. And I think the introduction has already been made. Heat is increasing and we actually see that that's happening. It is actually killing a lot of people, 489,000 people globally every year, which is actually from the natural disasters the highest number. And that can become even more. There's an additional number of people that can be killed by heat if we continue in the wrong direction of 250,000 heat-related deaths. But I think what I would like to make a message today is that we see this urbanization and heat are strongly connected. And just sharing some factors that contribute to that. So density in cities have increased buildings, materials to make sure that actually people are connected and compact, which is also good for urbanization and climate-related issues. But regarding heat, we see a lot of issues. And decisions and that governments and planners and leaders can make in planning and decision is something that we see as crucial actions to do. But not only density in cities, we also know transportation. You know the congestion that is often happening in urbanization that is happening rapidly and maybe not well planned. This is an outcome. And this is also actually affecting the heat issues by trapping gases in the atmosphere. But it's also something that we as planners sometimes overlook. We look at a map of a city and we see green areas and we think, this must be good for heat. But if you think about areas that are sprawled and actually you need a car to get into the center, it's actually contributing to it. So I think it's all interconnected. And of course also from waste, we see a lot of emissions coming out and heat issues. So we can also think a bit more about how to plan land use better to make sure that it's not concentrated in places and affecting people living in cities. Also building materials are a key contributor to health in cities. Well, they can actually be a cooler of cities if you think about water storage and greenery adding to that. So there's a huge opportunity actually to make better decisions on that, providing building codes, for example, that are stringent and promoting cooler and resilient cities. And here I would like to show you some examples talking about the mapping that we do as urban planners. Here on the left you can see Nairobi. That's actually where the headquarters of UN Habitat sits and where I live. So you can see the green spaces in the city and you can also see the Nairobi heat map. And actually the green areas, this was sort of a natural geographic situation and the plan was made in 1900. Kenyans were planned actually to go in the places where there is way more heat, worse soil conditions, etc. And the incoming communities were planned in the green areas, hilly, rainy. So you can see that there's a lot of linkages between inequalities in cities actually related to heat and geographic conditions. And on the right, you can see Sharjah. We did a public space program there. And there you can also see that the heat areas is where there's a lack of green space, public space, and which happens also to be in lower income areas. So UN Habitat promotes an integrated approach. And we would like to see how can we integrate heat and health issues more in integrated planning. So I would like to take you through the 5 key principles that we promote and how we see health and heat can be integrated. So we talked about the compact city. That should be also efficient, because compactness can also lead to heat. We see the connected city. That can be through cars. No, we promote public transport. And actually, how can we make cities more connected to make functions closer to your home, jobs closer to your home? So you can actually cycle or you can walk. So we promote an active city related to that. Then a vibrant city and livable city to also make sure that, as I mentioned before, promoting these proximities, promoting people interaction close to home. Inclusive and safe. We've seen places designed not in an inclusive way and not public spaces, for example, not being distributed equally. And lastly, resilient cities. We need green cities, bringing in nature in our cities to help us, not only with heat, but with most of the related climate issues that we face. And this is one of the examples that we worked in Tajikistan, in Korok, a mountainous area, a city in a valley, where we did a comprehensive analysis actually on heat, on green spaces, actually on how buildings are being designed and how that can be, actions can be taken ahead in the future. So we went from urban planning into capital investment planning, prioritizing projects for the issues that the cities is facing. So not only through planning, we see key areas of work. I think we will discuss them today. We need to innovate. We need to come up with ideas, bringing maybe in nature, but how to do that in a smart way, and also in a way that we work together. There are many sectors involved. Also supporting cities with guidance and expertise. Capacity building, how can we move those projects onwards, that they are implemented and maintained. Governance and policies, we are actually working with the Heat Resilience Officer within Habitat. And I think there are also more and more examples that cities themselves have heat resilience officers. So including that as a coordinating role within the government, we see that as a key opportunity. And data, knowledge and exchange. I think we need to know what we are talking about, especially when we are working often in the global south, in cities where there's not so much data available. How can we bring existing data together? And you see below some of the tools that helped us forming those principles and supporting cities to take local climate action that also addresses heat. Thank you. This was my introduction, and looking forward to the discussion and to hear your inputs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And that data question is an important question. We're going to shift gears slightly and invite our panelists to come and have a seat. And we can, yep, that's great. Thank you. If we can have the panelists come up and have a seat, and we'll get this started. I'm really excited for this panel today because a lot of what we're going to talk about is, actions that people are taking. These are real things that you can take away with you when you go back to your own homes and think about how we can take action on the topic of heat. And so I want to just take a few moments to introduce the members of our panel, and then each of them will spend about 5 minutes going through a quick presentation. Thank you, Joy. So first we have Mr. Vatsa with the National Disaster Management Authority and the Government of India here on the very end. 25 years of experience in disaster risk reduction and recovery, but in particular served as the Secretary for Rural Development. So a great addition to our panel discussion today, and thank you so much for joining us. Remotely, we have Abhiyat Tiwari, who is the lead for Health and Climate Resilience for the Natural Resources Defense Council in India. And he's joining us remotely, his specialty in adaptation mitigation policies for environment, climate, and disaster risk to public health. So great to have you join us, Mr. Tiwari. Then we also have Ingrid Coetze right here. Ingrid is the Director of Biodiversity, Nature, and Health at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the Africa Secretariat, and Global Cities Biodiversity Center. Thank you, Ingrid. And then we have Shaban Mwanda joining us here on stage. Shaban is the Policy and Resilience Advisor for Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center. Thank you so much. And Dan Lamb, Chief Executive of the Arbor Day Foundation. So we have a really wonderful panel for you here today, and we're going to start out with you, Mr. Matze. I'm going to pass you. Oh, you don't need the clicker. Okay, very good. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you.
India is a hot country despite the Himalayas, and we are not unfamiliar with heat wave. There is a term called Lu, and Lu is now actually it is a Hindi word, and it refers to intense heat waves. Now it is, I think it is included in the Oxford Dictionary. There is a Wikipedia page how the Lu affects the entire country. But this heat wave that we are facing during the last few years is different from Lu. This is, as you mentioned, heat is becoming more complex. You know, there are few reasons for that. One, of course, is the rising temperatures. Second is increased humidity. Third is the duration of the heat. And all these things are making the heat wave extremely challenging for us. Despite the fact that heat wave has huge health and economic dimensions, it's also a challenge for disaster management authorities. You know, I am a member of the National Disaster Management Authority to bring it up on disaster management platform, because it's not so visible. You know, it affects people rather imperceptibly, invisibly. I mean, it's not like earthquake, it's not like floods, you know. But in the last few years, it has gained the kind of attention at the highest levels. We have preparedness meetings right in the beginning. Actually, the hot season actually sets in after May. And we start preparing for heat wave right in January. And we call all the states and we start preparing since then. And of course, you know, we ask all the states to prepare heat action plans. We have issued the guidelines for developing heat action plans. Now, last 4 or 5 years that we have been preparing heat action plans, and it has definitely impacted in terms of reducing mortality. So we have considerable success in some respect. Now we are also preparing heat action plans at the level of cities and the districts. So the number of heat action plans is going up. It is definitely a class disaster. You know, it affects the poor disproportionately. So we must make note of that. You know, that people who do not have access to good working conditions, who do not have access to good housing conditions, or who have to commute long distances are more affected than others. So it's another challenge that we need to reach out to them and provide the kind of assistance. While dealing with the heat wave, there are three definite steps that we need to negotiate. One is the early warning, second is preparedness, third is mitigation. Early warning is very challenging, largely because we have long-term or medium-term early warning. We do not have the short-term early warning, 1 day, 2 day, the heat wave is suddenly, heat is suddenly spiking, and that too in a particular city. So that's the kind of challenge we face, or a particular village. So how do we provide the pointed information related to a spike in heat wave just over 1 or 2 days? And we do not know how long, we do not have the kind of precise information on how heat and humidity combines, the kind of wet bulb impact that people have, that is very, very difficult right now. So that's the biggest challenge with the early warning system. The second is preparedness, and we have been doing the preparedness for a long time, changing the school hours, changing the working hours. All those things are generally, a routine kind of a preparedness activity. What is more important now is that we also pay a lot more attention to mitigation. How do we conserve our water better? How do we reduce the temperature by investing in cool roof technologies? How do we take some local measures at the level of settlements, which can reduce the heat, the impact of heat? How do we help the people, the elderly people who are actually facing the impact of heat waves? Our hospitals are not prepared. Our health systems actually is not geared for those things. So bringing all these things together through the heat action plans is really the challenge. We need to invest in this area, and we need to allocate resources so that heat action plans are not just paper plans, they are actually implemented on the ground. And today, that is the biggest policy challenge before us, that we are preparing heat action plans, we are appointing heat officers, and we need to do a lot more in terms of bringing some local level changes in the way we go about our plantations, our water conservation, and the kind of interventions that are necessary at the level of settlements. So right now we are in the process of developing a national heat wave management framework. And the objective of this framework is to help the local governments, the city governments, the district administration to not just prepare the heat action plans, but also implement them on the ground through several interventions. It has to be led by local governments. It has to be driven by the local governments. And it's very, very important that they also allocate resources. We can very well allocate resources at the national level, but it won't have the right kind of impact. What is very, very important is that there is some pooling of resources at the local level so that we make the right kind of interventions. People participate, and people also contribute their resources. Any kind of intervention won't work. It would vary from one settlement to another. It would vary from one city to another and one state to another. So there are hundreds and thousands of interventions that are needed across the country. So we need to acknowledge the variations. So the plan needs to be prepared at the local level, and it needs to be implemented. It needs to be financed. So the central challenge again is now, how do we improve the quality of heat action plans, and how do we find the resources so that heat action plans can be effectively implemented on the ground. So these are some of the tasks that we are grappling with at the government level. We are paying the maximum attention to this issue. Our Prime Minister actually convenes a meeting every year to take a review of the heat action plans, how the states are preparing. But we need, I think, lot more inputs, lot more scientific evidence, and also some technical assistance, so that the heat action plans are really effective vehicles of all the three functions: early warning, preparedness, and mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You said so many things I can't wait to follow up with you about, but one of the things that really stood out to me is the need to allow local officials to lead the process when developing heat action plans. I think that's so important. Okay, so now we're going to turn to Mr. Mwanda, Shaban Mwanda. I'm going to pass you so you can advance your slide. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. My work has been made a bit easier thanks to the previous speakers, because they have really bisected the problem, so I don't have to focus on that. We are all converted that it's a big problem, and I'm here to share on one side the small moves that have been taken that can actually make big changes, but on the other side to a bit demystify the myth that people have to wait for big things to take action. So again, in order not to reinvent the wheel, I come from the Red Cross movement. We have this global network. We are present in 192 countries. So we have this big network of volunteers and staff that are present. So in order not to reinvent the wheel, we've been looking at how we can integrate heat action in our programs across the world. And we have developed the heat wave guide for cities because, like you stated, you heard from the previous presenters, I think cities where we find concentration of people, cities where we see the heat island effect, and therefore cities could be regarded as those regions that are most at risk when you talk about heat stress or the heat burden. And again, it was a whole lot of effort by the different partners to come up with this heat wave guide, which our staff and volunteers are using to integrate action. And of course, it talks about a lot of things that colleagues here have also already talked about, some of the actions that could be taken as well. So I won't really dwell much on that. But again, we have been in a process working on heatwave actions for both ourselves, but also working in partnership with others. We have had conversations on how to advance this. Our local branches in the national societies are working with municipalities and districts and provinces to advance this across the world, but of course joining conversations like the one that Joy is leading, the network. We have been part of these conversations. Again, some of the examples that we have seen, for instance, we have seen young people around the world. This picture was in Marrakesh. They're doing flash mobs to create awareness on heat action, what people should do, and simple moves like I stated, but aggregated, making a difference in saving the world and reducing the possible number of deaths that we have been told could actually be as a result of heat. But also in Italy, or above that, you can see Europe has also been a catastrophic area when it comes to heat stress. You have seen the number of deaths that have been coming up, and this photo was taken by the Italian Red Cross volunteers who are also doing some action on heat. Again, we think that the focus in terms of key messages moving forward should be the urban poor, because these are the ones that are most exposed and least able to cope with these risks. We're talking about casual laborers, we're talking about street vendors, we're talking about people who live from hand to mouth, we're talking about the homeless, we're talking about the elderly. And I think the key message here is how do we also come up with tailored approaches, how do we include them also in planning to understand their means and build on that to develop appropriate action. It's important to note that heat risks are actually preventable and can be greatly reduced through relatively simple and cost-effective actions. But we also note that funding is necessary, just like our colleague has been mentioning here. Financing local heat action plans to reduce heat risks. We resonate with your proposal as well, that they don't have to remain on paper. These actions have to be financed. So the challenge is for all of us here to see how do we raise this voice. For instance, they're talking about the loss and damage fund. How do we also make sure that this is part of that? And again, heat early warning, that should kickstart early action on the ground. So again, we have, for instance, in Africa, a very big tree planting campaign where we are aiming at planting 5 billion trees by 2030. So youth volunteers across Africa. We've been receiving updates from national societies in Kenya, in Malawi, in Ethiopia, and others where they're planting these. And we believe that this will also contribute to increasing carbon sinks that will probably be solving the problem. So again, we are also together with the WMO, part of this early warning for all conversation. We're looking at advancing the call by the UN Secretary General to see that early warning reaches everybody by 2027. There are pillars that are being spearheaded by different partners, the UNDRR looking at the risk knowledge, and also WMO looking at observations, but also the Red Cross leading on early warning dissemination and preparedness. So we'll stop here for this segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think the 5 billion trees probably really caught Dan's attention. So, but also the importance of communication and messaging, which you talked about, is so important. I really feel like one of the biggest challenges with respect to heat is helping people, the misinterpretation, misunderstanding of risk around heat. You know, people not understanding that everyone is at risk. And this is really a critical part of solving the puzzle. So thank you. So now we move on to Ingrid Coetzee. Ingrid from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. So thank you so much for joining us. I think here's your microphone, and you can advance your slides here. Thank you.
Sure. Let me just get my slide. I've just got one. Yeah. Okay, so ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, we work with more than 2,500 cities globally. I'm going to focus on an example in my own continent, Africa. And Naomi, you actually set the scene for what are the sorts of problems that we get in cities as far as heat is concerned. But before that, I just want to stop a little bit and step back and say, we're dealing with, there's a lot of talk about nature-based solutions. So what are nature-based solutions? It's one of those sort of panacea terms, and there's a lot of hype around it. I'm not a climate expert. I'm not a biodiversity, heat expert. I work in the space of biodiversity. And from the perspective of nature and biodiversity, there's always a little bit of trepidation around nature-based solutions, because nature is not a means to an end. Nature is what we're it's going to make or break us as a planet and as a people. And we need to understand that when we talk about nature-based solutions, whether these are for disaster risk reduction or climate adaptation or mitigation or whatever the case may be, we have to ensure that there are social benefits, the people, the beneficiaries, particularly the vulnerable, and also that there are benefits to nature. And I think the other important thing is that when we implement nature-based solutions, we need to understand the ecosystems in which they work. Now, that brings me to my case study. We've done a lot of work in the city of Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam in Tanzania is one of the fastest growing African cities. It last had its master plan done, I think, in the 70s. It's literally growing out of its seams. You can see the right-hand picture. It's a concrete jungle. They have huge problems around limited budget. Naomi talked about data, very limited data. There's been a lot of development in terms of rapid bus transport systems, etc., but there's also huge problems with flooding, huge problems with heat. And when we started working there, the city came to us and said, look, we have some open spaces, and we've got a good long tradition of open spaces. We used to have a beautiful forest in our city. Most of that is now gone, whether it was used for urban development or informally settled, or the forests were cut down for charcoal or whatever. We need to do something. We've got problems, as I said, around flooding and heat. We have very limited resources, and we don't know how to prioritize those limited resources. So what we did through a sort of a co-production process involving whole of society, somebody talked about that earlier, also whole of government, all the levels of government, was we took an ecosystem-based approach where you look at what are nature's contributions to people and to the citizens, what is still there, where there are remnants of forests, where there are still some mangroves, etc. And we overlaid this in a spatial way with what are the challenges. So where is the heat? Where are the water security issues? Where's the flooding? And we came up with this tool. We call it the Thematic Atlas. It was done in a very short time, I think about 7 or 8 months. Very consultative process, so we had a lot of buy-in from the city engineers, the politicians, the planners, the biodiversity people, also academics, local communities, the youth, faith-based organizations, etc. And we essentially came up with this plan where we identified about 7 or 8 major challenges. Heat was one. Heat was linked to the transport corridors, no surprises there. But it was also linked to things such as airborne diseases and air pollution. There was a water security issue, and they recognized there was a biodiversity loss issue as well. And what this plan does in very simple ways is to provide a snapshot to the decision makers to say, if you have little money, you've got little time, you've got huge challenges and needs, this is the best investment, the biggest bang for your buck. And it shows what can be done in very practical ways by showing best practices from other parts of the world. It also gives them guidance in terms of what's the sorts of steps that you can do. It's not a detailed scale thing. It's a policy document, and it's something that can be done in a very simple way with very little data. And I think that's the important thing, using the local knowledge, because we didn't have the time or the money or the data to spend years doing assessments and all of those sorts of things. So, and just the last point I want to make around lessons. I think that there's probably one of the biggest things is around partnerships. Secondly is coming out with ways in which we can leverage additional funding through partnerships. And I think finally it's the issue of bringing the whole of society on board, working with everybody so that there is, from the Matar leader to the gogo, the old lady, to the academic, to the business sector, to the mayor, that there is buy-in and support. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That was really wonderful, tying together some of the themes we've already heard. You know, what to do, what Naomi raised about the issue of data, so a good demonstration of what you do in the absence of good data. I'm already seeing some other themes, like we're really talking about engaging both deep at all levels of government and wide across all levels of society, and what a great demonstration of this. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think I know one of the things I'll be reading on my flight home later tonight. So thank you. So now we're going to turn it over to Dan Lamb, who is the Chief Executive of the Arbor Day Foundation, and hear a little bit more. And I also have to just say, Dan played a critical role in the development of the Tree Cities of the World program. So glad to have you with us.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Honored to be on the panel with these great leaders. And thanks for the presentations earlier. They were great and scary a little bit. So the Arbor Day Foundation, for those of you who are not familiar, we are an international nonprofit organization. We have a very simple mission, and that is that we inspire people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees. That's all I'm going to talk about is trees. So if you're not interested in trees, you're in the wrong room for me. But trees are, we also have a belief. Our belief is that trees bring people together to do great things, just like COP. And it's true. Trees are a powerful tool. There has never been a more important time for trees than today. Trees are not a must-have anymore. They are not a nice-to-have anymore. They aren't just for spring flowers and for beautiful fall color. They are for helping provide nature-based solutions to the climate crisis that we're in the middle of right now. And Ingrid talked a little bit about that. But that's what we do at the Arbor Day Foundation, and we help plant trees in cities and towns and traditional forest lands all around the world. And we do that through our partners and through our programs. And trees in many ways are that Swiss Army knife in the climate battle. They can help to remove pollutants from the air, help to stop and slow stormwater runoff and flooding, help to create jobs and build economic opportunities, and yes, they help deal with extreme heat also. Anyone who has been walking through the blue zone or the green zone over the past several days can do a study on where people are standing, and they're jostling for space under any shade they can find. And we're fortunate, there are some beautiful trees at the Expo Center where people can find some relief from the extreme heat. We also recognize at the Arbor Day Foundation, as much as we love trees, we know they're not a silver bullet. Trees are not the answer, the only answer to our climate crisis. And they're not the only answer to extreme heat, but they are part of the solution. And there are lots of co-benefits that come with planting trees anytime we do. So within this space, there are a few key things I wanted to touch base on. One is there are loads of programs and initiatives that are happening around the world at the city level and neighborhood level. People don't have to reinvent the wheel. Ingrid talked about a couple of their examples. There are lots of examples that we can help point you to, lessons learned that you can steal, borrow, adapt, and use trees, vegetation, create more green space to help cool your communities. The technology and science that's available today is better than it's ever been to help guide at the neighborhood level or the community level or the regional level how you can use trees and green space to help mitigate the urban heat crisis. Second piece I wanted to share is that it is getting warmer, and as a result, the kinds of trees we plant, the species we plant are adapting. The palette we choose from based on the climate zones we live in are adapting. It is getting hotter, and as Joy said, we'd be delusional if we think it is not going to keep getting hotter. And so you want to make sure you're planting the right tree in the right place at the right time. And at the Arbor Day Foundation, we can help guide you on helping with species selection to make sure in your neighborhoods, in your communities, whether you live in South Africa or India or Nebraska in the United States like I do, that you're picking the right trees for the benefits that you're hoping to realize, whether that's shade, whether that is stormwater runoff, or whatever it might be. And the third thing, and some of this has been talked about, is we have more science and technology than ever before to guide us in where to plant and what to plant to help address extreme heat. But it is, when you're implementing, when you're taking the ideas to action, one of the most important things is to have partners, planting partners who know what they're doing. Because we can easily point out on a map where trees are needed to mitigate extreme heat, but unless you have partners like Ed Lewis in Madagascar, who helps us with the biodiversity project, but also cooling communities in Madagascar, Paulina Cervantes, who leads urban and community forestry in Guadalajara, Mexico, leading the fight to cool that community through urban tree planting. She knows how to do this. And Meg from Nashville, Tennessee, who is engaging underserved communities to plant trees to cool their communities. These types of on-the-ground partners, we can't do it without them. We can point out what needs to happen, but until we build authentic relationships and permission to go into neighborhoods and communities to plant the right trees in the right place at the right time, it just doesn't work. And so having those partners, which Ingrid and others have already talked about as a key piece of it, and at the Arbor Day Foundation, we count on these partners to get those trees in the ground, maintain those trees so that they grow and sow the benefits for years to come.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's an excellent point, is to say that so many times we think about, where we're going to place trees, but we also need to think about the species of trees that are going to serve us, not for the climate of today, but actually the climate for the life of the tree. Is an excellent point to make. So we do have Abiyat Tuari on the phone, I think, or online with us today, and I want to give him a moment to maybe address, something that we're seeing. The theme across all of these really is about how local governments can take action to address extreme heat at the community level, and wanted to give you, Mr. Tuari, an opportunity to address this with your experience with the NRDC in India.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much. And firstly, I must thank Global Heat Health Information Network and all other partners for organizing this very important event, particularly in a year which has already, which is already set to break all the records in the history for heat. I think we are already 1.4 degree ahead of the pre-industrial area. So that's already something which we were aiming 1.5 degree, which we were aiming to restrict by the end of the century, is now almost here. So there is no need to say, I mean, if there is one hazard, or if there is one extreme weather event or climatic event that has got exaggerated because of the human induced climate change, then it is heat, and there is no ounce of doubt about that. So yes, and I'm gladful that I'm representing a country which is like nearly 17 or 18% of the global population. So we have a humongous challenge, but we also have a great leadership from national to state levels. Dr. Krishna Vats sir is sitting there. NDMA has played a tremendous leadership role in addressing this issue of extreme heat to protect 17 or 18% population of the world, right, in India. NRDC is among the pioneer institutions that I come from, among the pioneer institutions that started working on the heat action plans in India and developed the first citywide heat action plan, first South Asian citywide heat action plan in the city of Ahmedabad, that eventually got scaled to several other cities and states and districts with the help of the national leadership, again, as I mentioned, from National Disaster Management Authority, the India Meteorology Department, the Health and Family Welfare Department, and their counterparts in the states, at the subnational level and in the districts and the cities. So yeah, we have done a lot in terms of addressing this issue at the preparedness and response level. But now is the time that we shift from saving lives to livelihoods. So as Dr. Watts was saying, that we are now also targeting on developing the longer term strategies, the mitigation plans, not mitigation frameworks, not just preparedness and response plans, which have worked fairly well in protecting the lives of people, but we also need to ensure that we protect the livelihoods of the people, because we have we have seen the impact of heat, recent heat, on the other sectors of economy as well, not just on health. For example, last year, we noticed that heat had impacted the agriculture, the power sector, and other key sectors of the economy equally. And that's where these sectors also came together in the national dialogues that NDMA holds every year, raising their concerns about the issue, and they're ready to work, not just in silos but together. And I'm glad that our national institutions are um, bridging this gap of bringing together the key sectors of the economy on addressing this issue of extreme heat. I'll keep it short because I know will must be running out of the time very soon. But I'll also speak about NRDC's work. We work with the cities. So when I mentioned we started with Ahmedabad, city of Ahmedabad, the first South Asian Heat Action Plan, we still work there. We are going deeper into our action plans also. So, vulnerabilities, as Dr. Vatsa was talking about, that uh, who is more, affected by heat. Within cities, not all people or not all areas affected equally. So understanding the vulnerabilities about the heat, who is more impacted. And if we go even deeper, within household also, women, for example, or, children or elderlies or people with comorbidities are more affected by the heat. So in one of our recent work with the city of Jodhpur, which is a tier 2 city, again in the western part of the India, which is very hot and has very hot and arid climate, where we are working with a slum, with a women-driven self-help group, non-profit group, Mahila Housing Trust, with the slum women, and through them with the local urban body in developing the heat action plan, where we have done the a block level vulnerability assessment, like cities distributed in around 80 wards, 80 different wards. So ward level vulnerability assessment, which wards are at high risk of heat, for different reasons, like what is the population density in that particular ward, what is the population ratio of women in that particular ward, what is the ratio of children in that particular ward, what is the access to park, what is the access to water bodies, access to health services, and many other factors, and calculating all that, coming up with a risk score, so that targeted interventions could be deployed in the wards which are at high risk. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to share from our work that NRDC has been doing in India. And again, we are very thankful for the national support that we receive from the national agencies like NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, and also for the guidance that we receive from the global level, like from the Global Heat Health Information Network. I'll rest my remarks here. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm audible.
Thank you, Mr. Rall. You actually provided a really nice transition into, just a quick a point that he raised, which was the tangible ways and the importance of cross-sectoral collaborations to help us do this work. And so I just wanted to give any of the panelists a moment to talk a little bit more specifically about some of those cross-sectoral collaborations. I know, Dan, we were talking about some of those before we came on, and any of you to kind of talk a little bit about sort of how they help reduce heat-related hazards, but also economic risk and societal dysfunction from extreme heat. Didn't know if anybody wanted to take a go at it.
I'll pitch in here. I mean, I think it's something that we haven't really talked about. A lot of us talked about partnerships, the linkages between heat and water and food and all of those things, and we talked about the need for investment. You mentioned, I think, the point about job creation. And I think that particularly in the global south countries, certainly the part of the world where we come from in the global south, is that job creation and bringing because it's the most vulnerable, the poorest poor, Naomi talked about that, is that there's a lot of potential for creating work for unemployed people, youth, disabled, women, whatever, through tree planting programs, through nature-based solution programs. In South Africa, we have these working for programs. There's one on wetlands, there's one on trees, et cetera, and I think that because, yeah, sure, we need big money for these big programs, but we also need to invest in terms of getting jobs out there for people. So I think that is an area, cross-cutting area, where there could be more done.
I could, yeah, I could also speak a bit on that. We have been part of this consortium, the NBEL consortium, that also tries to understand the linkage between climate and health, and heat has actually also come up, and there are also a few experiences that along the way we are trying to also look at and investigate further. For instance, looking at what my colleague here has talked about, I think the focus should also be on the migrant workers. Because heat, definitely the threshold differs from region to region. So there are these reports that are coming up, for instance, people migrating from one region to another when their bodies are used to a certain threshold. And often people migrating are coming from regions that have health systems that are already stressed. Now, when you migrate to a region which is your body is not used to, and after a few years you're returning with complications, probably kidney diseases and so on, which are going to even stress the already stressed health system further. So I think the problem is a bit more complex, and it requires more research and conversation in line with that, which also calls for stronger collaborations. Thank you.
I would make a very strong pitch for improvements in housing. And if it's important, it's without the right kind of improvements in housing, we really cannot make a long-term impact. Which means that, see, one of the main problems in the cities is that low roof. The roofs are very, very low, and when you go inside the house, very hot, unbearably hot. You need to increase the height of the houses. You need to think of better circulation of air. You need to think of cool roofing technologies, cool roofing materials. I think we have this problem on such a scale that if we start investing in this area, this emerges as an area of specialization. It's a huge employment generation area. That how do we bring about the housing improvements? And along with that, we are also addressing several challenges, heat wave being one of them. So I think what is important today, and I think your work is very, very important, that we bring in at least a few examples, few case studies where our interventions at the level of communities, settlements, has really made a big difference. We can show how these differences have brought about a change in the living conditions of the people. And I think that can be replicated. That's really the way forward. So I would be a strong advocate of investing in the people's housing, so social housing, so as to address this issue on a long-term basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will just briefly say this is really why we have things like COP. So I applaud the World Health Organization for bringing this panel together, because we all work in our circles, and the opportunity to begin engaging the tree planting community with the health community, with the architectural community, with all these different communities who have their own interests and their own approach to things like extreme heat. And how do we begin building those Venn diagrams and look for those overlapping sectors where we can start making impact together and getting that bigger bang for the buck. So just thanks for this kind of conversation. So to answer your question, it is having the courage to step out of our comfort zone and have conversations with folks who we maybe don't really understand what they do, but we know we have common interests, to begin putting these kinds of circles together and coming up with solutions.
That was great. Yes, having the courage. So I think we have time for a couple of questions. I'm going to Do we need a microphone for the audience? Okay. Yes. Okay. Oh, yes. Mr. Vatsa has another meeting he has to get to, so I'm so sorry if anybody has a pressing question.
Thank you so much. This has been incredible. My question is directly related to COP28. I'm very curious, and you recognized that your Prime Minister participates in your heat action map planning. What, if any, text are you looking for to come out of COP28 agreements as we follow the GST and move forward to our next NDCs? Are you all advocating, and I see you're wearing a party badge, in the negotiation space? How is this showing up, and is there specific language or text you're looking forward to seeing?
Global goal on adaptations. This is essentially adaptation, and what we are advocating for is that people need to be given more choices, more alternatives, and it should not just be a government-led program, it should be a people-led program. And therefore, we need to have, all the countries need to have the kind of flexibility and the autonomy of choosing the sectors and introducing different kinds of adaptations, and adaptation to heat wave is certainly one of them. Thank you.
We still have other questions from the audience, so I think we have one over here. Thank you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm from Engineers Without Borders Canada. I just had a few questions. One is, I didn't hear much about particulates and places like Delhi and et cetera, in terms of obviously we know that particulates are a problem always, but with heat increasing in the cities, it's just going to get worse and worse. Marginalized populations, we talked about poor, we talked about old people, but I think it's also the very young, so young babies, or young children and babies, as well as people living with disabilities who may not have the mobility, and those who suffer from mental health issues with the anxiety due to the heat. It's very real. And also recent immigrants to the country or to the city who may not have the language skills or have the social capital to be able to get access to that data and the analysis and the early warning. And the elephant in the room for me is air conditioning. So in the West and emerging economies like Indonesia and whatnot, the take-up of air conditioning is massive, and it's predicted to grow by 600–700%. So people will just go into their homes, those with air conditioning, and there's also, so as an engineer, I'm like, yes, there's all sorts of cool green tech for cooling that's developing, right? There's vests you can wear that cool your body down a degree or two, and you put them on babies, et cetera. So I know I'm not naive enough to think that's the solution. It's just, there is that. Okay. I'm just wondering about that it's happening. That's okay.
Okay, this is on. Yes, I'm not an air quality specialist. I can't talk about particulates. But I can talk about some of the other things that you raised. I think air conditioning, yes, it is the big elephant in the room. We're sitting in here in a part of the world where everything is air conditioned. I come from a part of the world, I don't have an air conditioner. I can afford it, but I'm deliberately not having an air conditioner. But the majority of the people in my country cannot afford an air conditioner. So we get really hot, and in winter we get really cold. It doesn't snow, but it does get -5 or whatever. And I do think that that is a space, an industry space, where there needs to be a strong pushback in terms of air conditioning. I mean, Dan made the point about, it's interesting to see when people go outside and we don't have the air conditioner, which, by the way, is too cold, people flock to the trees. And it's noticeable, the difference between when you're walking in the sun versus when you're not even 5 meters away, you're walking under the trees. I think the other point that I would like to explore, and my colleague here from Uganda is, and he mentioned the point about migrants. We live in a continent where there's huge migration down south, and there's migration between countries. Uganda is also a country where you have huge migrant populations. Some of them are as a result, or many of them are as a result of economic conditions. There's poverty in their countries, or there's war. But there are also people that are leaving because their country has got too hot and too dry, and they can't survive there anymore. And I do think that that is an area where certainly the whole of society and the whole of government approach needs to open up and look more at how we can support these migrant populations. And I think that nature can be a connector. It can be a sort of a way in which to bring people into society. There are some amazing programs in other parts of the world where through connecting young people and old people, migrants and locals, for example, through food gardens or through tree planting exercises and using nature, getting together in those public green spaces. So I think that is certainly something that one can promote a whole lot more. I don't know if...
I'm not a scientist either, but, and you can about guess what my answer is going to be to most of your things. Just plant trees. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that you can put a shade tree over a home. All the research is out there talking about how much it decreases the need to run your air conditioner, turn it down, or even use it at all. Those same trees are pulling pollutants from the air, those particulates from the air. Those same trees are creating mental health by allowing people to get outside, experience green space. They aren't the answer to everything. I know that, but gosh darn, we should plant more trees.
I guess to wrap up, so we're at time, but I just also want to say that having access to an air conditioning doesn't help you if you can't afford it. So energy affordability is a critical part of that question. So just to kind of leave us today, let's not lose momentum on this topic. Let's think about meeting at the World Urban Forum in November of 2024 in Cairo, right, to keep talking about this. And if you want access to the resources that you saw today, you can be directed to the website for Jen, but also information about our panelists here and their slides for what you saw today. And I hope that after you leave this session, you will go home, think about how you can integrate some of what you've learned here today into your own planning, preparedness, and response for heat. Thank you so much.